Morning. I was up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and my wife was born in Minot. You betcha. And, she comes from a very large family. She has 5 sisters and 2 brothers. Kim and her 5 sisters are called the Force. And may the Force be with you. And so this is North Dakota, Minnesota, salt of the earth folks. They migrate west. North Dakota, they don't have 50 shades of nothing. It's all either this or that. It's like, And so I grew up in a religious family, missionary kid, preacher's kid. Kim's family, they're all expressive. They love loud. They hug loud. They fight loud. They forgive loud. I've come from a religious family. We lie about most stuff. We hide pretty much everything. When we get together, we have to have a service of worship, order of worship and order of service. So, in fact, my dad's an old-time preacher, the kind that when you ask him to pray, he gets possessed and his voice changes. And the first time he did that, Kim burst out laughing, thinking he was joking. Was a culture shock. So I'm up in North Dakota, and the beautiful thing, and Keith mentioned this last night, having a great time up there, and surprised him. Well, these are storytellers. I mean, they sit on the tractor or the horse all day long thinking about the next thing that they can tell somebody. And so they're great storytellers. So after the presentation, we go out to lunch, and they have this horseshoe-shaped long table. There's about 30 of us. And we sit around for an hour and a half eating lunch and telling stories. And they are great storytellers. Story is what penetrates into the precious places of our heart. It affects us because every single human being is a story. So we're sitting there, and there's a really elderly couple that are part of the group, and she's very gregarious, very outgoing, very communicative. He is sitting there. They're probably in their early 80s. And he's sitting there with his hands like this, and he just chuckles and, looks at his wife. And so about an hour and a half into the conversation, he clears his throat. And the whole place goes silent. Obviously, I'm dealing with a sage of the community. And he says he's now going to offer his part. And he says, well, you've been married a long time when your wife gives up sex for Lent and you don't find out till Good Friday. I'm like on the floor. I think that has got to be one of the funniest things. And the delivery was so perfect. It was so unexpected. We're going to go home. We're going to go to our friendships. We're going to go to our families. We're going to go to children and grandchildren. And we have 6 children, 9 grandchildren. And I'm married to a woman, as probably many of you are, that really don't care much about theology. Really doesn't. I don't go running in, you got to hear this latest quote from Jacques Ellul I found, or from Baxter Kruger or whatever. That's not a conversation that we have. I'm kind of in my own world in terms of the theology stuff. And I want to tell you, brothers, that don't feel the pressure of having to figure out and communicate all the things that the Holy Spirit is doing in your heart. Not your job. You don't even have to process it in some rational, intellectual way. You know what my wife wants? She doesn't want theology. She wants incarnation. She wants the Word becoming flesh. Right? And we need to exchange incarceration, the places where we're trapped and stuck, for incarnation. Because everybody's in prison. I was with a bunch of my friends in prison. I was visiting. And I said, how many people get the opportunity for the government to pay them so that they can just think about their lives for a while? I said, all those people racing around out there in their own prisons, they're not stopping long enough to think about anything. My wife wants to see the incarnation of the Word of God, Jesus, in my flesh. That's what she wants. So do my grandkids and my children, the people I work with, and my friends, and my enemies. They need to see that. When they look in a mirror and can't see Jesus, they got to find a human being in whom to see Jesus. And we get to do that. A lot of us, well, all of us, we don't plan the cards we're dealt when we come into this world. And there are a lot of things that are stolen from us. There are a lot of things that are broken. And then if we don't deal with it, we turn around and begin to break things ourselves. And eventually we need to let things go. I come from a long history of broken things. I have an aunt. My dad has 10 in his family. He's in the middle of the pack. My mom has 5 in hers, German Baptist, but my dad's from a renegade, illegal alien family. They snuck across the border into Canada from the U.S. Was the big family secret for a long time. And what happened around that was really pretty awful. That is, I'm my oldest aunt on my dad's side. She's 94. She's a historian, and she loves me. And she loves that I write. And so she and I have had this ongoing, beautiful relationship. But she's written a family history, and I know that my great-grandfather was, as they called it back in the day, this is the term they used for abuse, strict disciplinarian. Right? And my great-grandfather was a strict disciplinarian, and that was handed down through the generations. And my great-grandfather was famous for lining up the kids when he got back from a trip, and if there was any negative report from their mom, he took a literal cat of 9 tails to them. And that's 9 strands of rawhide embedded with pieces of metal and glass. And he was a strict disciplinarian. One of his sons became a hunter, marksman, was in the military down in Little Rock, Arkansas. Some evidence he went AWOL. But he ends up working in the orchards in Spokane Valley up in Washington State. And he was in his 40s now. He had married. He and his wife decided to adopt a little girl, so they went to the orphanage. They were actually going to adopt twins, but one of them was gone by the time they got there. So he adopted a little girl. In the meantime, he was working the orchards, but on weekends he'd go down into Spokane, and he'd go and listen to these little groups of kids, little girls who would be street corner singers, and they would sing hymns and country songs and for coins. And they would supplement the family incomes that they had. And he became enamored with this little 11-year-old girl, blonde, curly-haired little girl. And he was 45. And a series of events took place. This little girl had a 16-year-old brother, so my grandfather reached out to this young man and taught him how to shoot and how to hunt and all these things, primarily to gain access to the little girl. At one point, this little girl's mom, who had divorced her first husband, got involved in a correspondence relationship with a man in Billings, Montana, and at one point walked out of the home, got on a train, and went to Billings, leaving the 2 little kids in the care of the next-door neighbor who had 2 little children himself. During her absence, he raped the 11-year-old. My grandfather stepped in to rescue her. At the same time, some kind of illness swept through the community, and his wife and the adopted little girl, Gracie, stayed in the house, were quarantined, and a tent was put in the backyard. And my grandfather, now this little girl was 13, he became sexually involved with her in the tent in the backyard. Shortly after that, my grandfather ran away across the border into British Columbia with this 13-year-old girl and hired a preacher. We have the marriage certificate, and he marries her And she had her first miscarriage at 13, her first live birth at 15. He paid off the preacher, signed his own marriage certificate. And when that first baby was born, she was 15 and he was 47. He hadn't divorced his first wife, and he now was building a family. That little blonde, curly-haired little girl was my grandmother. And so we come from a history. Everybody does. It's part of our story, whether we know it or not. We come from somewhere. And my grandmother had 10 children before she died at the age of 39 after spending 2 years in a mental institution. She'd been in a hospital in Victoria, BC at the same time my mother, who was 18 years old, entered nurses training. She dies. My grandfather dies. My dad is 12 years old. My dad doesn't have a father or a mother. Children's Services comes in. They collect all these children, find out they're illegal aliens and don't have proper paperwork, and they disperse them across the U.S. and Canada. The boys went to farms as farm laborers. They'd work the fields during the day, sleep in the barns at night, watching the families through the windows. I know that because I heard my dad say that to one of his brothers one time, and he said in a rare statement of openness, he said, maybe that's why I'm so angry. He didn't know I heard it. So my dad, at 14, working in this farm, a woman shows up that wants to adopt him, and it terrorizes him so bad, he runs away from the farm and up and across the border into British Columbia and becomes a logger. My dad becomes a logger at 14. Logging camps, kind, embracing, warm environments. At 18, Gladys, the oldest sister, and Bonnie, one of the younger sisters, dragged my dad to a revival meeting, a Sawdust Trail tent revival meeting. And my father has a massive conversion experience with Jesus. He walks right out of the logging camps and into Bible school in central Canada and meets my mom, who has finished nurses training and wants to become a medical missionary. They get married, move to Alberta. He has a church for a year, in which time I'm born. And when I'm 10 months old, the three of us pack everything we have and we move to the highlands of New Guinea, where I grow up. So my dad totally was ready to be a father. He didn't have a chip for that. If he'd had a chip for that, it had been utterly smashed by his father before I even showed up. So my dad scared the hell out of me. He was a strict disciplinarian. And I grew up in what seemed to be a minefield. But good thing, at least he had a mission to distract him. At least he had God's work to keep him out of my life. And I didn't want anything to do with this man. He scared me so bad. I spent the days growing up inside of a culture. New Guinea is a very interesting place. It has over 800 unrelated language groups. We were inside the tribe as first outsiders, a tribe that is 40 to 60,000 people over 100 square miles. Spirit-worshiping, warring, ritualistic cannibalists. The first book ever written about our valley, the Baalim Valley, is called Cannibal Valley. I was the first person to know their language. I'm a year old. It's my language. It's my first dreaming language. When I'm 5 years old, Wycliffe comes in to translate the language, and I'm the informant. Also, when I'm 5 years old, I'm inside the conversation that the Dani tribe were having about whether to kill my parents or not. And I didn't feel in danger. I'm not one of those ghost people. Also, 5 is when the sexual abuse started inside the tribal culture. Some of it was endemic to the cultural frame of reference that they had, and some of it was targeted because I was the outsider. And it was bad. By the time I was 6, I was already a predator. 6. You can twist the heart of a human being. But then at 6, I was sent away to missionary boarding school. Another safe environment like logging camps. And all the horror stories you've heard about boarding school, they're true. First nights, the big boys would come and molest the little boys. Nothing quite like sexual abuse that will rip the fabric of the human soul to shreds. The shack represents the house on the inside that people help you build. And some of us, we didn't get good help. And then in the middle of this, you can't say anything because there's no one you can trust to say anything. And you've lost everything. When I went to boarding school, I lost everything that I thought I had. I already had lost my parents. My mom was a follower. In fact, the first time I went home back to the station from boarding school, I called her Aunt Betty because there was a white woman named Betty at the boarding school, and I figured that must be what you call white women. Betty's. My mom's name's not Betty. I lost my mom. I lost my dad. I never had my dad. But then I went to boarding school and I lost my tribe. And then I lost my color. I found out I was white. And that was a huge disappointment. I'm still kind of a little ticked off about it. But it does explain a few things. But I'm a firstborn preacher's kid, missionary kid. I'm a third culture kid, and we don't belong anywhere, but we know how to adapt. And I became an adapter and a survivor. The shack on the inside, that house that people help you build, that mine was just a hovel. It became the place that I stored all my addictions and I hid all my secrets. The place of shame that I would never invite another human being into because I was terrified I would see in their eyes the same self-loathing that I saw in my own when I looked in a mirror. But I'm a performer now. Living from the outside in, I drag pieces of wood and create a facade that I can paint as fast as I can pick up people's expectations, and I become a different thing depending on who's the audience. And my great question is, what do you want me to be? Just tell me, and I'll be that. And I hang in there as long as I can because you got to understand, I've got this little thin perfectionist performance layer that is covering an ocean of shame. And shame is your driver. I don't think arrogance is most people's problems. I think it's shame. Shame is different than guilt. Guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is I am something wrong. Guilt has a place because we hurt people. We hurt ourselves. Shame has no place because it's an accusation of the very good creation, the imago Dei, the image of God that you were created in. And if you can get someone to believe that all they are at the core of their being is a piece of crap, you own them. Shame. I had a theology that came from my evangelical fundamentalist side that matched my experience with my dad. I believed that there was a God that was on the backside of Jesus. He was the darkness behind Jesus. And thankfully, when the tribe came into relationship with Jesus, they pulled me in with them. I didn't have any kind of a transactional conversation with my parents. It was the tribal people that came en masse into relationship with Jesus, and I got swept along. And Jesus saved me from God the Father. That was my theology. That there is this narcissistic, abusive deity that's behind the back of Jesus that Jesus came to save me from. There is a God who is absolutely self-absorbed, that is different than Jesus, and that God needed to be appeased, and you needed to make sacrifices to that God. And thankfully, Jesus would stand between me and that God so that if that God saw me for who I was, hopefully Jesus never had to go to the bathroom or anything, I get smited. It took me 50 years to wipe the face of my Father off the face of God. But I'm a performer and adapter. Now, survival skills are survival skills. And one of the beautiful things that I believe about God is that God does not come to you and rip from your hands the very things that kept you alive as a human being when you were a child. The very things that are now impeding your relationships, those things kept you alive. And God does not rip them out, but He hangs in there with you until you are ready to take the risk to open your hands and let those skills go. Religion is about performing your way into the affection and the approval of God. That is very different than trust. Give me religion any day because it is so much more easily quantifiable. Trust? Man, I didn't trust anybody. So my journey in my life has been about learning to take the risk of trust. This is why I loved theology, because you didn't have to actually trust God. You just had to know your stuff. It's like porn. It's the imagination of a real relationship without the risk of a real relationship. Right? It's about the dehumanizing of yourself through an imagination in which you're loved unconditionally and you have power over. Bad theology is just like that. So, I had skills. I'll tell you a couple of them. Hypervigilance. Walk in a room, you know where all the entrances are, you know where all the exits are, because the dominant driver is safety. How about this one? Leaving. Running. I went to 13 schools before I graduated high school. We got back to Canada. My father was an itinerant pastor. I am really good at leaving. In fact, the day I cried my way out of boarding school was the last time until major healing happened in my heart that I ever had a misser. You know, the thing that misses people. That got shut down and lost. Now, I'm a religious kid, so I don't actually run away from relationships. I just hear God call me somewhere else. How about this skill? If somebody says something and pokes a little finger down through your perfectionist performance and says something like, you know, you're not all that you're cracked up to be that you're presenting, you can spin it back on them so fast and make it their fault. It's an unbelievably powerful skill. Now, I'm 5'6". I've lost every physical fight I've ever been in. But I can take a 300-pound man and I can destroy him because I know how to hide knives inside words. And I can wrap God language around it to really dig it in and twist it. Survival skills. So, I got this shame. Shame tells you that you're not enough, that you're a piece of shit, that you're worthless. But you cover it over and you perform. And everything becomes about spinning the story. You're a different thing in different situations. And at the same time, I'm praying to God because I got these addictions going on in my life and I don't know how to deal with them. I try to do it through self-discipline, which turns out to be a work of the flesh. Yeah, good luck with that. Self-discipline comes from the outside in. Self-control, the fruit of the Spirit, comes from the inside out. Completely different. But I got nothing on the inside. I'm a desert, a wasteland, a broken house, a shack. But I adapt. I perform. I graduate Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude, first in my class. I'm walking out the door, and the thought crosses my mind, I fooled them. I didn't actually know I was smart or creative. I thought I just faked my way through because I got nothing on the inside. I'm hoping that one day I would become a real boy. Here's the power of secrets. I can't tell you my secrets because I'm terrified that you're going to be as disgusted with me as I am. And so I perform my way, hoping for these little bits of light, little bits of approval and affection, a little tap on the back. I'm looking for a dad who will tell me that he's proud of me. But if you offer those things, the very things that would keep me alive, I don't believe you because you don't know my secrets. You're loving the facade. That's the trap of secrets. They lock you into something that is not escapable. And I'm begging God, why can't you heal me? I have my moments of self-discipline where I have some control. I'm burying everything, and every time that it starts to fall apart, I hear God call me somewhere else, and I try to start over. Out of seminary, actually out of my undergraduate work in theology, religion, I get hired by a church. The only time I've ever worked for a church, I had run into this community of faith that was led by a man named Jerry Cook, and he was the first smart Pentecostal I'd ever met. Because I'm a rationalist at that point, and experience scares me anyway. And if you're mysticism, you've got to be off your rocker. But he happens to be pretty smart and accessible. So he hires me to work with the college kids. I'm 22 years old, and I'm in charge of one of the biggest growing things in Portland, Oregon, 300 to 700 kids at any given time. And one night, Kim walks in with 2 of her 5 sisters. She's there for the first time, and I spot her, and I immediately change what we're planning to do so that we can break up into groups of 2 and pray for each other. Power corrupts. That's how we meet her. Through a wild series of events that included getting knocked a half a block as a pedestrian by a 17-year-old high-risk driver and ending up in the hospital with complete and total amnesia, where I didn't know anything. I didn't know what country I was in, because you remember, I grew up in multiple countries, so I haven't got a clue. I didn't know what year it was, and I didn't know any single person who walked through the door. I only knew I had one relationship intact, and that was Jesus. That's all I knew. It was the most peaceful time in my life because I had no baggage. All I had was Jesus. Up until that point in my life, it was the best. Kim walks in to visit me at the hospital, breaks into sobs and rushes out. I was really a mess. And I'm thinking, laying in that hospital bed, she's cute. Lots of my memory came back over the next weeks and months. Some of it never came back. Cheryl, who I guess I was in quite an intense relationship with, never came back, which pissed her off completely. And she ended up marrying this other guy about 6 months later. What can you do? I had no memory of her. I have one little memory now, sitting in a car talking to her, but that just is not enough. So that opened up an avenue, and I'm on a trip trying to recollect my life, and I hear that nudge, that inner voice. I've never heard God speak audibly to me. I used to think I needed that in order to verify his existence, but I don't anymore. And I hear the voice say, "Marry Kim," which really scares me. But in that moment of weakness, I thought it was a good idea, so I was trying to figure out, since we've never dated, how to ask her. I figured to ask her in a group setting might be easier. So bright, us young men. I did it in a group of about 15 friends in which I palmed cards, hers to the bottom of a stack, and I gave everybody cards that had these really nice, beautiful, poetic expressions of affection. and hers simply said, "Will you marry me?" And when she got to hers, which was the last one, because I figured I'd wait till the last, because once she reads it, it's probably the end of the evening, one way or the other. And she opens it up, and the rule was you were supposed to read it out loud before you pre-read it. And hers said, "Will you?" And she does. "Will you?" If she was here today, she would say that what went through her mind was, if I say no, he will never ask me again. If I say yes, I can back out. You gotta love this woman. She says yes. We were married 11 days later. 11 days later. Church was amazed that you could get pregnant that fast, because they're looking at this thing like what in the world is going on? They thought there must have been something going on, because 11 days? No. It was I couldn't have made it 12. I'm serious. I am like semi-suicidal, because it dawns on me that I've now made a public declaration and put myself into a situation that I can't easily run away from. If I even hear God call me, I got to take Kim with me. Do you understand that at this point in my life, I did not know how to love a single human being? I didn't know how to love myself. And I didn't know how. I'd read the books about it, though. I'd studied it, so I know what it looks like, and I'm an adapter. Turns out I'm actually smart and creative, which empowers my ability to hide. We got married. I ran 104 temperature the day we got married. Our honeymoon was much of a disaster. I was really sick, but I think it was all emotional. We had a difficult first year. Six weeks into I went hunting with a bunch of guys. I came back, and Kim asked me a question, and I was in one of those, parts of your roller coaster faith ride in which I was intent on trying to tell the truth. And she asked me if I missed her. And it put me on the horns of a dilemma. But I was in one of those telling the truth modes, so I said, no. Which really pleased her. And I said, Kim, I don't have a misser. I don't. I would love to say I missed you, but I don't know what that's like. It had been so shattered. Now, did I let Kim in my shack? Did I tell her about my addictions? Did I tell her about my secrets? No. I had this thin layer perfectionist performance. Now, let me tell you one of the things that shame is absolutely powerful about, and that is that shame destroys your ability to distinguish between a value statement and an observation. Kim, when we first got married, would say these awful things to me, like, Paul, don't mix the colors with the whites. I mean, can you believe that? She's talking about laundry, and she's making an observation. What did I hear her say? I heard her say, I don't know why I'm married such a loser of a human being as you. Because shame destroys your ability to distinguish between an observation and a value statement. Fast forward, I adapt. And let me tell you, I was suicidal right off the bat, but I got it calmed down. I mean, there were times when Kim would just be upset about something, and I come from a background in which anybody's upset, I'm the reason. It's my fault. And that's dropping into my father stuff. And so, but I managed to keep it under control, and we didn't have a gun in the house. I went looking for it. We were just buying a house, and I was hoping that the people who had lived there before that sold it to us had forgotten a gun somewhere. And so I even searched through the attic looking for a gun. That's how serious it was. I didn't let anybody in, whatever. got it under control, became an adapter. We started having children. I'd read the good books about being a good husband, and I was a good husband. I'd read books about being a good father. I was a good father. It wasn't coming from the inside out. It was coming from the outside in. I'm still struggling with my addictions. Bam, up and down, up and down. Nobody knows about it. I'm hiding it. I'm performing my way. I built my facade again. My life blew apart. You know what? Let me say it this way. I would love to tell you that I finally figured out I was so messed up that I needed help, and so I went and got some. I'd love to tell you that. That's just totally not the truth. Some of us are so broken that the only way that we get exposed is to get caught. I got caught. January 4th, 1994, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, get a phone call, one sentence from Kim, and it says, I'm waiting for you at your office, and I know. And what Kim knows is I'm in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. In fact, it had gotten so crazy. You know, when you end up in a situation where the things that matter to you, your values, are in conflict with your behavior, and it's so outlandish, you begin to alter reality to justify yourselves. Our power to justify ourselves is evidence of the grandness of our creation. It's profound. I thought that this person really loved me. Now, this is someone we knew for years. We knew her family. Their 8 children were embedded with our 6 children. They were part of our household. Knew her husband. They were part of the community that we were part of. This is not a stranger here. And for all of the repressed emotions of my life came flying through this little knothole of existence. And I dumped on her all the imagination that I finally had met somebody who really loved me unconditionally. Did I let her in my shack? No. If I really loved her, this would have never happened. And it got to the place where I thought Kim was going to have to die. Not by my hand, that God was going to take her out. I even took the woman out and we went and bought wedding rings. I mean, I'm telling you, I went nuts. And the phone call comes in, and bam, my world falls apart. All the facade comes down, and all I got left is the shame. And I had to make a decision whether to drive to where Kim was at my office and walk in and face her, or kill myself. But you know what? For some of us, killing ourselves is the last opportunity to run. It's not hitting the bottom. Killing ourselves is running. And I decided to hit the bottom. And I did. I don't even know how I made it across town, and I drive into the parking lot, and Kim's already taken my office apart. And I walk in to face the wrath of God. I believe the wrath of God is the love of God. And Kim lets me have it for the next 2 years. After the first 4 hours, I say to her, Kim, if we're going to do this, I need to tell you every secret I have. And naively, she said, bring it on. And it took me 4 days to tell her all my secrets. And at the end of those 4 days, Kim was destroyed. And she wanted to know every detail about everything. And I told her every detail. And she said, I will never believe another word that comes out of your mouth the rest of your life. And I believed her. But I'd hit the bottom. When you hit the bottom, you stop pointing fingers. You own it. Yeah, I didn't have a good relationship with my dad. Yeah, I was sexually abused. Yeah. You stop. I did this. I let go of control. That was scary. How I did it? Kim didn't ask me to do this. I walked over, picked up the yellow pages, opened up the phone book, and I started with C, counseling, and I started with the A's, and I worked my way down, and I saw Agape Youth and Family Services, specializing in sexual abuse histories, and I picked up the phone, and I made an appointment, and I walked in and sat down in front of a man who became my therapist, my friend, Scott Mitchell. And Scott sits in front of me, and for the first time in my life, I say these words to another human being. Can you help me? Can you help me? Scott says, yes, I can help you, but it's going to take 1.5 years. I say, I'm in. Scott sits back. He says, Paul, everybody sitting where you are, they always say they're in. But after a couple months, they'll feel a little bit more in control, a little bit better about themselves, and they'll bail out right before the really hard stuff. But I'd hit the bottom. I said, I don't even trust my ability to know anything anymore. I'm not leaving until you tell me I'm done. He said, okay. And we worked, and every day we worked, I'd call Kim to tell her what we were doing because I had no secrets. And every day she would say the same thing. Yeah, right, whatever. And that was okay. I couldn't work on this in order to save her or to fix our marriage. That was already destroyed. I did that. I had to find a way to find some change, or else I'm not going to stay here. I can't hurt any more people than I have, especially my children or their children. And Kim is pummeling me every day. How can a human being do this to another human being? Everything that she had thought, I had dismantled. And she was furious. The intensity of her fury is what helped save my life, because it drove me to deal with every piece of crap that existed in my history. It took Kim and I 11 years to heal. That 11 years is represented by Mackenzie's weekend in the shack. 11 years to dismantle my view of God, to go down into my shack and just tear it apart and do the major reconstruction to put myself back together. Scott and I were together intensely for 9 months, and then he became my friend. 9 months, he said, you're done. I said, what do you mean? You said 1.5 years. He says, we've never had anybody work this hard and stick with it. And it's because it was life or death for me. 11 years. 13 years of silence, not talking to anybody in terms of anything anymore. And I had been a teacher, a Bible teacher. No. 11 years. 11 years before we're sitting around a group of friends, and we didn't make the adultery the new secret. Her family knew it, the community knew it. Her dad, who lived with us for 17 years, was in the middle of it. Our 2 oldest went through it with us. The 4 younger, I told at different times over the next years. Consequences are still there. I'm only reconciled to 2 of the 8 children whose lives that I hurt so badly, the other family. One of them happened at the beginning of 2015. Consequences. Consequences aren't judgments. They're part of the respect that is due us in terms of the incredible creations that we are. And we're sitting in a circle, and Kim says in front of me to these folks who all know my history, she says, you know, People would tell me that one day I needed to forgive, and I'd say, "You don't know me." She said, "I never thought I would ever say this in my life." It's all worth it. And she's not justifying adultery or betrayal or any of those things. She's saying, there's nothing so dead that God can't grow something in it. Nothing so lost he doesn't know where it is. Nothing so broken he doesn't know how to put it back together. And she is saying, and he's worth it. She'd tell you she didn't do it right. I don't care. Don't care. There is a God who climbs down in the middle of our crap. This is why the cross is precious to me. God didn't create the cross, we did. The cross is a dark torture machine only designed to hurt people and then to forcefully extract their breath. But from the foundations of the world, God decided he would go down to the depths of our brokenness and find us. And it would require him to enter into our lostness, into our sense that the Father couldn't hear us or we couldn't hear him. But he knows the truth, not just, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Because that's Paul Young's cry. God, where are you? He knows the whole psalm, and halfway through it, 22, it says, "You don't despise the affliction of the afflicted, nor will you turn your face from him." And the end of the psalm says he finished it. He goes down to the deepest place of our loss, and he destroys it to raise us up with him. So much so that I wear a ring with a torture device on it, because it has become an icon and a monument of grace that tells me that God will not be stopped by anything that I can bring to the table. I'm blessed beyond repair. 50 years it took me to become a child. 50 years to learn how to stay inside the grace of just one day. You're not asked to spend today's grace on imaginations that don't exist. You're not asked to be a future tripper. In those fear-based imaginations of what's up and ahead of you, God doesn't live in those things, because God doesn't live in anything that's not real. God lives in you and inside this day and what's in front of you. That's it. Everything else is imagination. Control is a myth. This is about relationship. This is about someone who relentlessly pursues you because you've always been his. This is the heart of a father. And everything in us resonates with that desire. Our hope is sure. His character is always good, and there's no darkness in him. You trust because you know the character. That's when we begin to take the risk of trust. And we enter this daily, one day at a time adventure where we get to participate to the praise of his glory. Amen.